Hello and welcome to the Posture Dojo Podcast. My name is Sam Miller. I'll be your host on this postural transformation journey, sharing some stories from my own postural transformation journey and speaking with experts from a variety of fields, some that may be surprising, some you might expect. Today, I'm excited to speak to Karin, who is an experienced posture corrector. How would you describe yourself, Karin?
I'm a yoga teacher and I'm a personal trainer. And I have scoliosis myself. I have a 59 and 55 degree curve myself. So I've been working with my own posture forever. And I work with a lot of women who have scoliosis and or osteoporosis.
Scoliosis and or osteoporosis. We're very familiar with scoliosis. Osteoporosis, I'd like to go into. The word osteo seems to me like it's something with the bones, and then porosis seems like it's porous.
Yep, you nailed it. Yeah, so osteoporosis and osteopenia are when the bone density starts to decrease. And for women, especially after going through menopause, when our estrogen starts to really decline, we often see a big decrease in bone mineral density because estrogen has a huge amount to do with laying down new bone. So as we get older, it becomes more and more of a concern. And I started out as a yoga teacher. I had always had my personal training certification in the background and was doing my own things with that. But I have always tended to attract an older population. And more of my clients were coming to me after having a DEXA scan, which is where you find out about your bone mineral density. And they were finding that they had osteopenia, which is the precursor to osteoporosis or osteoporosis. And so I just started turning my focus toward that to see what I could do to help them.
So this is really important. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I've spoken with a lot of elderly women who are in a situation which I'd love to offer insight and helpful advice to with some of the corrective techniques that I've been developing. But as a younger athletic male, it's a very different approach I've found. And some of the techniques that when I first laid out some of the first versions of my protocol, it was too much. So how do you approach someone who's realizing in these 50s, 60s, 70s that, okay, this is a very serious condition and something needs to be done? Where do you even begin? Because usually it is with some type of pain that's becoming more present, or in your case, I guess people have had a DEXA scan. So talk me through, like, where do you even start to approach this type of case?
A lot of it begins with just mitigating some fear, because just in the culture that we have been brought up in, women have been taught to lift lighter weights for fewer repetitions to have that toned body versus women get concerned about getting bulky. So just from a lifetime of getting that messaging, it's really hard to get older women to feel confident picking up heavier weights. So we first have to get over that fear. So a lot of times when I start working with people, we're actually not touching weights at all. We're going through a lot of the movements without any weight so that they can get really comfortable with mechanics, and I can make sure that their spine is in a good alignment, which for something like yoga isn't such a big deal because you're not loading the spine. But when you start actually adding in some weight, we really need to make sure that the spine is in a nice neutral position and can be supported. So once I get people comfortable with the mechanics, then I'm adding really light weights, something like a 3 or a 5 pound dumbbell, and just getting them confident and then slowly going from there. But it does take a while. The messaging is really strong about women, and this misconception that women can get bulky from lifting heavier weights is really a sad thing, because we don't have testosterone. That's what you need to get bulky. So women who do have larger muscles, they really have to work at doing that. It's not something that just happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you mentioned building confidence in a lot of ways. At those years, you may have been holding various stories of weakness or of kind of in ignorance, not in a negative way, but just not going it through ranges of motion, not activating certain ranges of strength in the body. And not doing that for many years can allow compression and can allow more stagnancy in the body. It sounds like you're integrating the emotional aspect. right?
Yeah, I have to. I think I'm glad that I'm a yoga teacher first, because I think it really allows me to bring a more mindful approach to the way that I work with people. And it's really ironic because I'll be talking to a woman and she'll say, "Oh, I watched my grandchildren yesterday." And then I'll say, "How do you feel about lifting this 5-pound weight?" And they step back, and then I say, "How much does your granddaughter weigh?" And they say, "Oh, she weighs 25 pounds and she's picking her up constantly." Sometimes it's also just making them realize that they're actually lifting heavy weights in real life when they pick up cat litter or dog food or move mulch around the yard or things like that. And they start going, "Oh, yeah, I actually am lifting those weights." And so it starts to break that barrier down a little bit.
That's really interesting because that is that emotional aspect to generating strength, that psychosomatic approach, right? Integrating the psychology and the body. So, let's stay honed in on that 65, 75-year-old woman who may have been through the traditional medical system, which was surgery or not, bracing or not. And beyond that, there's not too much else to do. And so there's not a lot of breath work. There's not a lot of Schroth method breathing, not even a lot of kind of fitness or movement or elongated or aligned practices in their bodies. And they might be starting to feel the consequences of that. Obviously, there's an extra level of gentleness, delicacy, strength that needs to come from a new place. What's the goal here? And obviously, like, their goal is, I want to get out of pain. But for you, once you've helped them kind of address that pain, what do you look to do? What's your kind of guiding direction of where
Well,
you
it's
take them?
longevity, right? Because I have to tell people that I don't want you to go into a gym and just start diving into lifting your one repetition maximum. All of the research out there on bone density, really what they're finding is women need to be lifting between about 75 and 85 or even 90 of their one repetition maximum. And your one repetition maximum is the amount of weight you can lift one time and one time only. And when women hear, that's when they get a little bit scared. And so my goal is to present them with something that they can do for an entire lifetime. So we're not starting at 75 or 85% of your one rep max. We're starting at 60 or 65% of the one rep max. And because the last thing I want is for someone to come in and get injured. I don't want them to strain a muscle, because anything like that is going to set them back. And it's just going to reaffirm the fear that they already had coming in. So I take a really slow approach so that I can just build really good habits and skills that are going to take them through for a lifetime, because my goal is to get these people lifting until end of life, right? We want women lifting until they're 85, 90, 95 years old. And it can be done. It can be done. I just think a lot of people, when they get a diagnosis of osteoporosis or osteopenia, they leave the doctor's office and the last thing they hear is, "Don't bend over, don't lift anything heavy." And those are exactly what they need to do to build their bone density. And I understand why doctors say that, right? They say that because first, do no harm. They don't want these people to go out and pick up something heavy and fracture a vertebra or a hip or anything else like that. But without strength training, balance training, postural training, all of those things, it leaves them really confused. There are a lot of mixed messages out there about what happens next. And doctors often will turn to medication. And there's nothing wrong with medication. I have no problem with it. But a lot of women have pretty severe reactions to it, or they want to try something else before they go on medicine. To me, we're trying to get that information out there before someone gets on medicine so they can see if it works or not. And it takes a while. Bone takes 8 months to a year to actually see a difference in bone mineral density. And most women are only getting a DEXA scan every 2 years. And I've talked to women who have actually had to fight to get a DEXA scan so that they can see what their baseline is, because right now most women don't get that until they've gone through menopause, which means they haven't had their period for a year. So sometimes by then they're already behind the 8 ball, because now they don't have estrogen in their body to help them build the bone mineral density back up. So the earlier we can find this out, the better. So it's a little challenging.
Interesting. I've been learning about this concept of mechanotransduction, which I think is a similar thing, where the
Yes.
mechanics that you apply to your body, the forces that you apply to your body, actually transfer the messaging to the cell. So the cell actually responds to those mechanics that you're applying, and creates your body in a reaction to the environment. So
Yeah.
as you do this lifting, your cells are realizing, oh, we need to be stronger because I'm being put into an environment where I need to become stronger. Is that kind of a layman's explanation of what's going on
Yeah,
here?
yeah, absolutely. Mechanotransduction, right? Wolff's law, it's all the same thing. So Wolff's law is essentially that when you stimulate bone, it responds to the stimulus that you put it under, and that it lays down new bone. And I think what happens is, I think people tend to think of bone as inanimate, right? We think of it as rock or wood or something, but bones actually have this really rich vascular system, and it has sensors in it that actually respond to the stress or lack of stress that it's put under, because part of why women end up with osteoporosis is because of a lack of stressing their bone. So it can go one way or the other. So what happens is we need to send those messages, and we can do that through strength training. We can also do that through impact training. And impact training, a lot of times, again, this is something that has a little fear factor with it, because women tend to picture box jumps, jumping up onto a 12-inch box and then
Mhm.
coming back down.
Or I
But
picture the kung fu movies where you're kicking and punching the wooden post.
yeah, exactly. But it can be something a lot more simple, right? It can be something like heel drops, or where you literally, you stand, you lift your heels, and you just allow them to fall back down. And you can see on screen that your whole body is reverberating with that action. And that's what you want to feel. So I usually start people with something simple like that, or stomping has a similar impact. So it doesn't have to be hopping or jumping, but it certainly can be. But we start with something really small that seems not intimidating for somebody who really isn't used to impact training.
For sure. I love those reverberations in a lot of different ways. I'm actually integrating a vibrational plate into some of my stuff at the moment. I'm loving it. Just reverberation. I mean, it's sending through waves of tension and relaxation, and allows us to really become aware and experience that gravity in our bodies. When we combine our breath, when we combine our postural activation with the breath, with those reverberations, we can start realizing I'm really choosing how springy I am or how springy I'm not. And obviously, the spine is designed as a spring in a lot of ways to bounce our brain around the planet. The decompression that happens with a collapse or a structural compromise, like a scoliosis or a kyphosis, you actually get less of that bounce, and you get that more of a decompressed, like a flat tire or kind of worn out sneakers. I do think a great goal is getting back in touch with that springiness. And that's just a little additional piece of that impact theory for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then you take the fact that the intervertebral discs, right? They don't have a direct blood supply. So the only way they're getting nourishment is through movement. And a lot of times what happens with fear, right, is people become more still and static. And especially I notice that with clients who have scoliosis, they're so afraid of movement that everything almost becomes more stagnant and brittle. And I keep telling them, because they're, again, with scoliosis, you're told not to twist. Same thing with
Mhm,
osteoporosis, you're told not to
mhm.
twist. But the fact of the matter, everybody twists all the time, right? If you're in the car and you have to turn and look behind you, you're going to twist. And we need to be able to maintain that kind of movement, and we just have to do it in a smart way.
Yeah, that held me back literally for quite a few years, like not wanting to twist. I because it's going into my weakness, into my collapse, into my vulnerability. So I built
Mhm.
strength and protection and just bracing myself internally to
Yeah.
avoid that for many years. And now that I'm on this process of elongating and aligning, that's now my limitation that I've had to undo. And the
Mm.
way that I've found to undo that is through particular movements that are specific for my body, but then also the most powerful piece being that exhale where I'm releasing, I'm letting go, and I'm also bringing in a new program, a new subconscious message into that area of the body. And that maybe I trust, I'm safe, I can
Yes.
do it. I have this range of motion. For a moment, I even tricked myself to think I'm not limited there. And I just
Yeah.
pretend like I'm not limited there. And then all of a sudden I'm not limited there.
Yeah.
Right? Like no matter how, wherever you're at, you come across this thing, oh, that's just the way I am. That's just the way it is. I'm trying. Just for a second, pretend, trick yourself to think, oh, I actually have freedom of movement there. It happens. If you can
Yeah.
just trick your mind for just a moment, you're sending those messages through your nervous system and allowing that new reality to happen.
Yeah. And it's funny because people do things in real life that they're afraid of doing in a class or when they're working with a professional. And that kind of goes back to that lifting the grandkids thing, is they don't even think about it. They just do it. But then you put a weight in front of them and there's suddenly this hesitation. So getting past that's really, a lot of it is mental. It's a lot of just rebuilding the trust that you have in your own body and your ability. And I think we need to remind people that the body is adaptable, right? That the body we have today doesn't necessarily have to be the body that we have in a year. We can always change things. It's just believing that we can. You're not stuck. And I mean, I've been following your journey for quite a while. And part of the reason I started following you on social media was just because of how impressed I was with how you really took the reins on your own health and well-being. And I think a lot of people want to give away their sense of empowerment to somebody else. Like they want somebody else to step in and fix them, right? Yeah. And they want the magic pill, the magic solution, without really being a part of that solution. And I think there's a balance to be found there. You have to work with the right professionals, but you also have to be willing to do the work yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the conventional medical system is looking for solutions that it can measure with numbers, and pills are the easiest thing to get somebody to do, as opposed to get them in a training program, address some of the psychological elements. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing, which is why most of the solutions are the surgery, the bracing, or medication to dull the symptoms. And just don't do any, just to get rid of what you've come to me for, which is the pain. And there we go, we're good to go. So let's go into, I guess, prevention of some of this osteopenia, osteoporosis. You've mentioned strength training, impact training. What else can someone do who knows that their bone density, their spinal structure is a top priority?
Those are the primary two things, right? We have progressive resistance training and then we have impact training. But people who know that they're vulnerable, if they already have a diagnosis of osteoporosis or osteopenia, the other factor is just fall risk in general. When people are weighing something like going on a medication or doing resistance training, it's really important to remember that while the medication may help with the actual bone density measurements, it doesn't help to reduce fall risk. To reduce fall risk, we really need to get into the resistance training, some dynamic balance training. We have static balance, and that might be something like standing in tree pose in yoga posture, standing on one foot. And there are people who are really good at doing that, but then they don't have great dynamic balance, which is your ability to maintain your center of gravity while you're actually moving. And that would include walking, running, stumbling over a lift in the sidewalk or a little lip or crack in the sidewalk, and then actually being able to recover your balance. And none of that is served by going on medications. Even if someone does do that medication, they also need to be doing these other things to prevent fall risk. Someone over 65 falls every 60 seconds in the United States. And according to the Osteoporosis Foundation, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men over the age of 50 will suffer of a fall and fracture. So this is something that's really prevalent, especially in an aging population.
In terms of medication, what's the current best practice? And then let's talk about nutrition with that. Like, how can you complement that with nutrition?
Yeah, so medication is not my area of expertise. I mean, the most common drugs out there right now are called bisphosphonates. And if you look at the rate of reduction in fracture risk, they're actually comparable with exercise. For hip fracture, vertebral fracture, it ranges between 40 and 70%, which is a big range, but the range is big because there's so many research studies out there and they've all come to different conclusions. But with exercise alone, there's a reduce in fracture risk of 51%. And you're talking 40 to 70% with medications. So you can find something comparable, but then you get all of the other benefits of doing strength training and resistance training in addition to that, and then the balance training and all of that. As far as nutrition goes, one of the things that people don't realize is that for older women, as they go through menopause and they lose that estrogen, not only do they lose the ability to maintain bone density as well, but they also don't assimilate protein as well. So as we get older, we actually need more protein than we did when we were younger because our body is not as good as at actually taking the protein in. And protein is the building block for bones and muscles. So people could be doing all of this strength training, but if they're not actually getting enough protein in their diet, in addition to that, they're not going to be laying down new bone or building muscle very effectively. And one of the things I try to encourage people to do, and this is a really high number, is I'm trying to get the people I work with to have about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So that's a lot of protein, and most people aren't going to reach that goal, but I feel like at least if they're heading in that direction, they're going to understand how important it is to get more protein in their diet.
What does it feel like when you're starting to experience osteopenia and osteoporosis? Like what symptoms might you start experiencing?
Most women actually don't know. They're actually shocked by the diagnosis because there are women who, let's say they were runners or they're really active. They might be running, they might be doing 2 or 3 yoga classes a week or something like that. So they're shocked to get that diagnosis because they don't have any symptoms. And then what happens is they go to their doctor, and even their doctors are surprised because their doctor knows how active they are and how they have a healthy lifestyle. It's just that they're not the right kind of active. And then the other way that sometimes people find out is they fall, and a minor fall results in a fractured wrist, or they might have vertebral fractures, like a compression fracture, because as the bone mineral density decreases in the spine, those vertebrae become a little bit more vulnerable to fracture. And that might be when they have some pain, is they'll have a compression fracture. And as that happens, now it starts putting some pressure on nerves, and then they start having back pain, and they go and they get an X-ray, and it reveals that there's a fracture in the spine. And then often that's followed up with a DEXA scan to see if it's actually a systemic issue versus some kind of isolated issue. These are fractures that are resulting from very low impact, right? This isn't like a car accident or falling off your bike or something like this. This is you trip and fall and go to put your hand down and you fracture your wrist, which it isn't common, right? That's not going to happen in somebody who doesn't have osteoporosis or osteopenia unless they're coming down really fast and hard.
Did you mention that yoga and running may not be enough to set or avoid osteoporosis?
Yeah, we hear that we're supposed to be doing body weight or loading our bones. And so what happens with running in particular is your bones, that mechanosensitivity that we were talking about before, your bones get bored. So what happens is when you're a runner, your bones pay attention to the first few impacts. And then after that, they're like, oh, we do this all the time. So they don't pay attention to that as a stimulus that tells them to actually get stronger, because they look at that as a stimulus like, we're already strong enough to handle this. We do this all the time. I don't have to get any stronger. And then it's the same thing with yoga. All you're moving around is your own body weight, which you're already doing all day, every day anyway. You're just doing it in different shapes on a yoga mat. So even though it's load bearing, it's your own body weight. So there's no stimulus there really to change anything. So that's where we actually have to start bringing the weights. And unfortunately, there was a study that was done a while ago that a lot of people still tout as something that proves that yoga is actually good for bone mineral density. And the research, they followed over 700 people over 10 years. And that's what people remember when they read about this particular study. But only about 150 people were women and only 120 of them actually had osteoporosis. And as you start looking at the research, what you end up finding out at the end is only about 43 people had osteoporosis and actually followed the protocol, and people only had to do the protocol for 2 years. And even then, there was no control group. So this group of people who did see this improvement from bone mineral density, we don't know whether they were strength training also. So we can't really attribute the positive things to yoga. And then other people went out and tried to replicate this study, and it's never been replicated. So that right there is a red flag. If you can't replicate a study and get similar results, you can't really, you have to take the results with a grain of salt and really pay attention to the other factors in the study.
It makes a lot of sense to me to keep the bones on their toes. So,
Exactly. That
yeah,
variability.
they're usually, the more we isolate our movements, the more restrictions and things we start ignoring and things that can hide. For me, I've had so many tensions and illnesses and disease hide in the stagnancies in the bodies. For me, it was the psoas and the hip flexor, and that was so tight and locked up for so many years. That's where problems started happening. My personal direction, I asked you earlier what your direction was, and it was longevity. And that is also part of my direction too. Longevity is the game I'm playing here. I'm not focusing on beating personal bests in lifting things, and I'm not going to be lifting or the way that I'm lifting things like apart from doing that thing. I want to develop an all-terrain body, because like when I'm hiking through the jungle to go to a waterfall and I'm getting a full body crawl up and down and over and under, it exposes weaknesses, and I value that. I seek those out. So I put my body into all-terrain environments to find those things, to find those weaknesses or places that I haven't felt before, those ranges of motions that I'm naturally going through to overcome an obstacle, but I need to develop. And because that will expose, oh, there's a tightness in there that you haven't really found in any other, you haven't found it in the gym, you haven't found anywhere else. So like I look for those and I appreciate those. So
Yeah.
it's really all-terrain longevity is
Yeah.
what I'm after. So, what is that lifestyle? What is that longevity lifestyle of movement that we're all doing well by training for? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Let me reword that so that we can,
Sure.
say a little bit out. What's the ideal lifestyle? No, what's the ideal movement lifestyle for longevity?
That's a great question. So it's going to include something that helps your mobility, right? So that's where yoga, dance. I love dance because, especially following someone else's instructions, because it gets you moving in a way that you don't already have patterns built in. It's like what you were talking about with the all-terrain body, right? You're going to put yourself in situations that are brand new, and it really does start revealing things about you. We need to pay attention to cardiovascular health. We need to pay attention to bone and muscle health, which is going to require some heavy lifting. We have to pick up heavy things and put them back down. That's just a factor that we need to embrace. And we can't have longevity without doing that. There's just no way to do that. But I love movement variability, and a lot of the research actually on impact training, they actually do something called multi-directional hops, because to your point, your bones like force coming at them from different directions. That's what really helps to evoke a really positive response. I mean, they've done research studies where they had people hop on one leg for every single day, 50 multi-directional hops. And it could be spread out through the day. And they've actually improved bone mineral density in the femoral neck by 2%. And the femoral neck, when somebody falls and breaks a hip, that's the neck of the femur that is most vulnerable when that happens. So anything we can do to put down new bone there. And that's one of the ways that impact and resistance training actually differs from the osteoporosis drugs. The drugs can slow down the reabsorption of bone, and it may be able to help lay down new bone, but we can't say where it's being laid down. But that movement variability can help us to lay down new bone in very specific areas, depending on the movements that we're doing.
So what's your message to someone listening to this, that 65 to 75-year-old woman who's in pain, has realized that they need to start doing more things about their spine, their bones, their posture? What's your advice?
My advice is to find someone that they trust, right? Find a good practitioner, somebody who ideally is familiar with osteoporosis and osteopenia and the special considerations that requires. And they need to get into the gym, or they need to make an investment at home and start lifting heavy weights. There's really no way around that. Like I said, it doesn't mean they dive right in, but progressively, they just need to start lifting heavier and heavier as much as they can.
Is there hope? Because I've met some people who are they're in a pretty heavy place. They're like, being in pain is not fun, and it can make you grumpy sometimes. It can make you irritable. Is there hope out of this? And what does it require from them to really change their situation?
It requires that commitment, right? And resistance training helps to decrease low back pain. It helps to decrease the pain from arthritis. And those are things that people are also dealing with as they get older. There was a really promising trial called the Lift More trial. And the results of that trial, it was all women who had osteoporosis or osteopenia. Many of them had actually suffered fractures in the past. And they had these women come in and start doing high intensity resistance training and high intensity impact training. And I mean, we're talking people who are 70, 75 years old who are now deadlifting their body weight. And when they were actually able to see bone mineral density increases of up to 18% in some of these women. Overall, they saw bone mineral density increases that were in the 2 to 4% range. But I mean, there were those standout people who came in and they really hit the weights hard and they saw the results. So this is absolutely possible. Your body is adaptable. Your body is resilient. That's what I think we tend to forget as we get older. We feel like the body we have is the body we have, and we have to remember that we can always make change. There's always room to make some positive change.
Amazing. Where can people find you, and what kind of services, what offerings do you have available?
I work with clients one-on-one. I teach a strength class every Wednesday, and it's geared toward bone mineral density and slightly older women. Most of the women who come to that class are between 50 and 80 years old. And then I also teach some yoga classes. I have a website. My name is spelled with an I, so it's Karen Weinstein. It's KarinWeinstein.com. And I also do a teacher training in somatic yoga. So all of the information that I have is on that website. I'm on social media. Same thing, it's just my name. So I would love for people to find me and ideally sign up for my email list, because I send out Monday musings every single Monday, and it always has some really valuable content in there. So
Amazing. Yeah, because it is about the mind as well. The power of belief of what you can control in your body that you may not have realized before, and you may have been inadvertently controlling in ways that aren't ideal for the long game.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you for evoking a positive response in the bodies of the people you work with. I admire the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Sam. It was such a pleasure to meet you and such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.